Restaurant Unstoppable episode 711 with Denyelle Bruno. And with excitement, allow me to introduce to you today's guest, Denyelle Bruno. Denyelle, are you feeling unstoppable today?
Oh, I am.
Yes, that's what we like to hear. So, Californian Denyelle Bruno is a graduate of the University of California, Santa Cruz, and the University of San Francisco, where she earned a BA in Psych and a master's in organizational development. While in college, she climbed the corporate ladder at Macy's before being recruited by Apple to be a part of their retail team. Other career highlights include 2 years as VP of retail with PureBeauty, 6 years with Peet's Coffee and Tea as VP of retail and marketing and operations. Man, you had a lot going on there. And 3 years as president for Drybar today. And for the past 2.5 years, Denyelle has served Tender Greens as CEO. I'm excited for this conversation. I really cannot wait to get into it, especially because you don't have a traditional path into the restaurant industry. You really don't
not at all. Not at all.
Those tend to be the best interviews. So I'm excited for this. But before we dive into your story, let's get that motivational, inspirational ball rolling with a success quote or mantra. What do you got for us?
So my mantra that I decided with my mantra about 2 years ago is that failure depends on where you end the story.
Failure depends on where you end the story. Dive into that.
So, people used to ask me about failures, and I'm sure inevitably it'll come up on this meeting too, but I don't really believe in failure. I think failure is part of the journey to any success. Yep. And if you look at the most successful moments in history, if you just rewound a little bit, depending on the situation, there's many failures in there. So for me, it just depends on where you end the story.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll probably pull back, or at least I'm going to do my best to pull back some of the layers on those failures. So I think those are where the best lessons are too, really, when you think about it. So a great way to get this thing started. Where does it make sense to start telling your story anyway? I mean, usually I ask, when did you know you fell in love with food? Or when did you know that this was going to be the hospitality, the food and beverage industry was going to be your path? But then I feel you put out the majority of your story because you didn't get into food and beverage until later on in life.
Uh-huh. So my path, I think my journey to food really was more a journey around loving people. And so, I've worked in retail, I've worked in service, I've now worked in food, broadly hospitality. And really the common thread for me those are all businesses where people are serving other people and they're serving them a product. At Tender Greens, we happen to be serving them food, amazing food, which of course we get into in more detail, but this is really a career around leading, developing, growing people who like to help other people in their everyday life.
Yes. At the end of the day, business is all about relationships and so much that you can pull from, regardless of what your come up is, there's so many lessons that could be cross-utilized, right? So when did you know that you loved people? I mean, that seems like that's the focus of today's conversation. Mm-hmm. Your passion is more about the people behind the food than the food itself. When did you know that people was your passion? Like, when did you start leaning into that desire of yours?
Yeah. So when I say I love people, although I do love people, I don't think people would probably describe me as sort of like a super warm and fuzzy lover of people. I think, though I do love people, I'm afraid to go too far with that, but I'm more curious about people. So in undergrad, my focus was social psychology. And social psychology is all about understanding what motivates people. And so I've always found myself to be incredibly driven to know what drives people, what incentivizes people, why people do the things they do. And, like most people in college, I thought my career would have something to do with my graduate or my degree. What I learned over time is that very often the subjects that people study in college do serve them well later in life, but not always in the most literal way. So I thought I might do something in social psychology, ended up doing retail thinking, I'll do this until I find a real job in social psychology, and then realized there's no more real job in social psychology than retail.
Well, yeah, and especially like hospitality and food and beverage. I mean, retail and food and beverage, people don't get into this work because of the masses of money they're going to make. You know, like
Right.
it's because there's something intrinsic within them that they love the work. So I think social psychology is at the core of hospitality and the core of retail, because that's what drives people in this industry. You need to understand that aspect of it to be successful. I mean, you can't summarize all the lessons you've learned in like one sentence about social psychology, I'm sure, but like, what are the biggest lessons you've drew from your education from social psychology that you're applying to this day?
Yeah. So this may not be obvious to everyone until you think about it, but for me, everything in life is built around incentives. So focusing on what drives and incents people actually makes a huge difference to understanding what, who people are. So in my business, I'm looking at the consumer a lot, whether they're buying food or a computer or a cup of coffee or getting a blowout. What's incentivizing them to do that? And then even more importantly for me, what can I do to help incentivize the team member or the employee that's serving that population? And if you understand those two things, you can be incredibly successful in this business.
Summarize those two things one more time. So I want to make sure I got that.
Okay. So there are two factors that really play out on a daily basis in what I do. Understanding what motivates a consumer is a very, very big part of retail, food, coffee, any business where you're interacting with the direct consumer. Knowing what motivates them, what's incentivizing them to come to your restaurant or to come to, your coffee house or whatever, is incredibly important. But what's even more important is understanding what motivates or incentivizes the employee to actually do a great job.
I love it. Awesome. And I think this is why it's so important. One of the big lessons we've learned in the show is why it's so important to understand, to get to know your employees, to talk to your employees, to find out what drives them, so you can find out where they're headed, right? What their desires are, and to feed those desires within the current role they're at, or let them contribute in some other way that you never even thought of, because you didn't know that was on the table, right? Because you didn't know this thing.
That's right.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love it. So I think I could geek out on this stuff, but we gotta share your story. So we gotta go back in time.
Okay.
So take us to the point when, I heard, it's kind of funny because you mentioned that you love people and you're curious about people, but you also, from my research, I found out that you're a little bit of a bully growing up. And these are your words, so I'm allowed to say it.
Yes. Yeah. For sure.
Maybe take us there. Take it to that point, and we'll kind of talk through your evolution, your progression.
Yeah. So, it's a great intersection, because when I mentioned earlier, when I say I love people, but I'm curious about people. I wasn't a bully because I hated people or I was mean necessarily. I think I was a bully because I had a pretty crazy childhood. Like a lot of people, I grew up in a very dysfunctional family. My parents got divorced when I was 12. My father was a homicide detective. Okay. And my mother was a homemaker for the first early part of my life. So they had a pretty volatile relationship. And I think that ended up manifesting in me just trying to deal with shit and trying to control things. And I think when you're young and your brain's still developing and you're trying to understand what's going on, you create all kinds of scenarios in life where you can either reenact things or try and master something that you can't master at home. So I think part of me being a bully when I was younger was just me trying to assert some control and power, not because I was just like a sociopath.
Okay. You're just trying to, that makes sense. I think that's when we live in chaos, the first thing we try to do is try to get control over something, right? Think about when the whole pandemic was going down, when people have anxieties and they don't know what's going on, the first thing they're going to do is try to control their situation, which is why all the toilet paper went away. Because
that's right.
You're going to stock up on toilet paper.
Exactly.
That's kind of what I'm hearing from you. Yeah. So you try to get that control. You're trying to get that control. What did you learn about yourself in all that? And, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but like, how did you get away from that to evolve into more of a, I don't know, a leader. I guess you a leader, right? I mean, that's a safe.
Yes, I would say that would be a good word for me. Well, I'm still learning, and one of the fascinating things about getting older is every time you think you've got a handle on who you are or learn something about yourself, you realize you were still probably in some stage of figuring it out. But I think part of it was literally psychological development. I mean, I think part of it was just the brain growing and learning to understand and socialize differently.
I think it's fair to say that you were even a learner back then. Your approach was just command and control, right?
Yeah,
like you
exactly.
like other interviews that I listened, that you were always the leader. You were always bringing people together, but it was more of an aggressive way to do it.
Right. So the negative side of my bullying took the form of asserting myself to take control in sort of a negative frame. But I definitely bullied my friends into doing the things that I wanted them to do. But I probably learned some lessons in that. I mean, I started a gang, when I was 10, called the Slick Chicks.
I knew you were hard. I didn't know you were that hard.
Yeah. I had a tattoo. So yeah, I had a Mickey Mouse clubhouse in my backyard, and so I started this gang called the Slick Chicks, and I made everybody write with a Sharpie on the back of one of their white T-shirts, Slick Chicks. So we had like gang T-shirts, and yeah, I mean, I guess back then they called it bossy, and I was very bossy. So my bullying didn't always take the form of sort of like physical or psychological harassment. Sometimes it was just motivating people.
So I know there's kind of a transition to you start taking school a lot more seriously, and sometimes I try not to do too much research before an interview because I learn so much and I forget that my listeners don't know everything. So you struggled through high school and like middle school, right? You didn't really take school seriously until after.
Yep, that's right.
Get into that.
That's right. Yeah, I struggled through high school. I think for the same reason a lot of kids struggle through high school. Again, if they also develop, if they grow up in a household that's not super focused on academia, and where somebody's maybe not groomed to be very studious. I had a lot going on in my life in high school personally. My parents had just gotten divorced. I lived with my mom, and she lived with a couple of friends in a condo in LA. She was sort of, figuring out who she was. I was just coming out or starting to figure out my sexual identity. And I think I was just more distracted than anything in high school. It wasn't that I was not a curious person intellectually. I just was so distracted that it was less important to me than other things.
That makes complete sense. So what changed in you post high school did you just get more confidence in who you were and your identity, that it took less of your, waking mind to redirect that extra bandwidth now to further growth on yourself? Like, what was going on? How did what changed in you to be kind of a aloof high school student to a badass college student that created all these opportunities for you?
Yeah. I literally haven't thought about it until just this moment, but towards the middle of my senior high school year, I got into a really big fight with the people in my immediate social circle. Really bad. Like another podcast. But it was to the point where I self-isolated a bit just to get away from them. And I think it was in that moment of self-isolating and not interacting with people. I mean, there's probably a good couple of months here that I started rethinking about my priorities. My priorities before that were hanging out in a park, smoking clove cigarettes, and looking for local bands, sneaking out of my house, drinking California coolers. I mean, those were the things that I really spent my time focusing on. And when I got into this huge fight with them, where I was literally like afraid to run into any of them, and I sort of hunkered down in my bedroom, I started really thinking about my life differently. And I grew up in kind of a small suburb of LA. And it was also kind of then that I realized I wanted to sort of get out of town. And it was all of that sort of came together. And I
was just saying, it's funny because everybody tends to want to get out of town to go to LA, and you're in LA and you want to get out. It's funny. So you had this time to self-reflect. Were you trying to vision the person you wanted to be? And if so, what did that vision look like? Or how did this introverted time affect you coming out of it? Like, paint that picture.
It was almost as if I just woke up one day and decided, like, what if I went from trying to be this really, emo, cool punk rocker chick to suddenly like this sort of like college professional. I mean, it was like literally I woke up one day and I was like, I think that's what almost like somebody who's like, I'm going to be a rock star. I was like, I suddenly can see myself as this sort of like intelligent person who goes off to college and, and these friends that I've left behind sort of look at me as like this crazy success story. That it's weird. Like I said, I like literally have not thought about it until just this moment, but I think that's kind of how it happened.
Well, congratulations on bringing your vision to fruition. Because I mean, you are that success story now, so that's incredible. So how did you start living your life differently from this point? How did you start being more intentional to achieve this goal of being a woman of success?
Well, I wrote an essay that it was, I learned enough basic stuff in high school. I paid attention enough to have, decent writing skills. I wrote an essay to get into UC Santa Cruz, and I really put my heart in it. I mean, I talked about my family, my upbringing. I talked about coming out at 15. I talked about the hardship I had with this group of friends. There was this period of time when my parents actually kicked me out of my house, and I ended up living with my grandparents. So I poured enough into it that I think it made me interesting enough to get accepted. And the reason I chose Santa Cruz is because, growing up in LA, I'd spent a lot of time at the beach. We had a house in Santa Barbara growing up. And so I spent a lot of time at the beach. I had researched UC Santa Cruz, and it was kind of like a cool hippie school with smart people, but it wasn't as hard to get in as Berkeley. And I got in.
So I want to dissect that a little bit, because I think there's so much power in what you just shared with us. And that's the power of vulnerability, the power of complete, utter transparency, what feels like in the moment at your own demise, but it's so empowering. First it's empowering to admit like who you are, being honest with yourself, right? But then to take that honesty and to share that with other people, the things that you were maybe be insecure about earlier in life, right? And coming out.
Oh yeah.
I mean, that's how you gain trust. And we can take this lesson and we can do the same thing in our own businesses with our customers, right? With our employees, and this place of complete vulnerability. And you got into this great school because of that. I mean, you instantly are going to suck people in when you get that open, that transparent, that vulnerable. It's such a powerful tool when done right. And it has to be real. Yeah. Do you want to dissect that a little more?
So powerful. And to be honest, something I really wish I had understood more a lot earlier. I think, gosh, I mean, the power of vulnerability, the willingness to utilize the things that maybe made you fearful or things that you thought were weaknesses when you were young, harnessing those things into what makes you who you are and being willing to express those things. I mean, for me, it's the, when people say, what lesson do you wish you had learned earlier in life? 100% that would be it for me. Just understanding that those things that made you weak or fearful before actually make you an interesting human.
Right. And I think vulnerability kind of goes hand in hand with self-awareness, because you have to be very self-aware to be vulnerable. You have to know. And very few people are self-aware. I think something like a small percentage of people who think they're self-aware are actually self-aware, which is just funny. So from there, you're hustling. You're in college. You're doing well. You're also working at Macy's at this time, correct?
Well, my first couple of years at UC Santa Cruz, I actually worked, well, no, I had several jobs. I worked in the school library. I worked for a pizza place for about a month before I got fired because this is before GPS. I had no sense of direction and I was trying to deliver pizzas, and I was working at one of those pizza places that had a like 30-minute guarantee. If you don't get it in 30 minutes, you get your money back. So they were just giving pizzas away like right and left. So I didn't last long there. So I had a lot of odd jobs. And it was really towards the last couple of years where I got a job part-time at Macy's and then worked my way up.
Right. We're back, and you were just starting to get into your professional career. Any key mentors? I love focusing on mentors and the people that influence us to help us become the people we are today. So reflecting back at this time, any key lessons or any key mentors that really stood out to you?
Key lessons, yes. Key mentors, no. And, you know, when I'm asked the question about mentors, I usually come from a position of, you know, I really didn't have any great mentors, but what the real answer is, I don't think I was a good mentee. I think, you know, I was one of those people who, I don't know if I thought I was too smart, or if I just wasn't open-minded enough, or if I didn't see the value in it, but I didn't have a lot of mentors. And I think that's because I didn't seek them out. And probably when they made themselves available, I don't know that I ever took it seriously.
Okay. So what advice do you have? I mean, where do you want to go with this?
Yeah.
I don't want to take you off your train of thought.
Yeah. So, I mean, it goes a little back to what we were talking about a few minutes ago in terms of being vulnerable. I don't know if it was an era or if it was just the type of person I was, but I think it's really important to be comfortable not knowing stuff. And I think it was later in life for me, probably in my mid to late 30s, before I started realizing that saying I didn't know something or asking for help was actually a character strength and not a character flaw.
Why is it why is it a strength?
It's a strength because, I mean, well, first of all, because you don't know everything. I mean, there's so much you don't know. And it's painful to imagine that, like, that I thought I did know everything because I was just cutting myself off to so much new information. And so I think it's a strength, A, because it allows for that vulnerability. And I think that makes people closer to you. But B, because it just puts you in a perceptive mode where you're willing to take in information. And that's so incredibly powerful.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And again, I think back to self-awareness, knowing what you know and knowing what you don't know, so you can let people in who can complete that, you know, to round off what you don't know, so you can get access to that information. But if you don't let that in, if you're closed off because you don't want to admit what you don't know, then you're not opening yourself up to those opportunities. And you know, like you said, like one of the things that I used to be like with the podcast, and I thought that by starting the podcast, I'd get access to all this information and I would just know so much. And the truth is, the more that I've learned, the more that I realize I don't know shit. And
yeah. Yes.
like anxiety for a while.
Yes.
That it's okay not to know.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah. Get into why that's okay.
Well,
I think you already explained, you know.
Yeah, I don't know why we ever thought it wasn't okay. I mean, I don't know where many of us get this idea that we're supposed to know everything. Like, I just don't even know where that comes from.
I don't even know. I think, social norms, maybe, like, I don't know, like maybe it was so important to not break out of the pack because get along with others. I don't know, but we evolved it as humans. This is something that is inherently in a lot of us, right? So there should have been some kind of evolutionary benefit to, you know, not showing your hand, right?
Yeah. I think, God, I don't know. I mean, it's like, on one hand, you know, there's some social status associated with knowing some things. So I think it's like, yeah, it's good to know some things. But somehow that got like mutated into like, you should know everything.
Right.
And I think it's illogical and it's untrue. So, I mean, I think the healthier version would be, there's some things I know a lot about, There are more things I don't know much about. There's some things I know nothing about. And as a society wouldn't be great if, as we're getting together and learning from each other, we can cross exchange this information. We can all learn a little bit more. But if I'm thinking I know everything and you know nothing, there's actually no point in us interacting at all.
Yeah. So bringing it back to your story, while at Macy's, you realized that you didn't know everything, and you started opening yourself up to people who knew what you needed.
Yep.
Any other way we can dissect that, or is it worth moving forward at this point?
I think that's it. I think realizing you don't know everything, so opening yourself up to learning new information, and also as you learn that new information, just sort of testing the water a little bit and being willing to sort of figure out what comes from that. Because if you already think you know the answer, then you're not even going to like learn those little things along the way.
Yeah. So I'm really excited. Well, any other key lessons with your time at Macy's before we start talking about how you were recruited by Apple? I'm sure you learned a lot from that organization.
Yeah, I mean, there's a crossover lesson. The crossover lesson is the reason I got recruited to Apple, which is when I was at Macy's, I was still in this sort of state of mind that I'm going to work in this retail job, and I'm going to keep doing this until I get some sort of a real job outside of this. And I think the good news about that is I didn't take myself so seriously. And so when I was operating at Macy's, I would be running departments, I would be learning things, I'd be learning things about the business, but I was also willing to be experimental because unlike a lot of people I worked with who were just like, here are the rules, follow the rules. I mean, it's a super authoritative, hierarchical environment. And so people are like, if you want to get ahead, you have to like follow these rules. Because I was kind of like, yeah, this is just, part of the journey for me. I was willing to sort of test things. And so it's what I later learned in life would be called servant leadership. But at the time, I would be hiring people. And again, the standard way of operating there was like, you demand something, people follow the directions, they follow it to a T. And if they don't, they're bad at their job. And because I wasn't like that personally, I hired people who weren't like that. And I would hire people to be part of my team that would truly be like a part of my team. And I saw a lot of success in that. So while other people were struggling with things like growing sales or having their team turn over regularly, I was seeing the success that was really happening because I wasn't sort of following the rules. And it was in somebody that I worked with who sort of saw me operating that way that referred me to Apple when this whole thing started. He was somebody I didn't work with that closely, but he went to work for Apple. And when they asked him for names of other people that he thought would be successful there, he gave them my name for that exact reason.
The culture fit for Macy just didn't sound like it was good for you. You need to be a part of an organization that was more centered around chaos and invention, right? And
yes.
So for people that are listening to this, and I agree with you that it's you can kind of if you do it right, tactfully enough, you can get ahead by doing what's not expected from you. Like you just mentioned, like you can zig when everyone else zags, and
yes.
But how do you find that balance in doing that in a way that isn't too far off the beaten path that you get fired? You know what I'm saying? Like, how do you find that balance of zigging on a path that you're not?
Yes, that's the key to it, right? So I think the safety net I had is that my results were always very good. I really understood what success looked like, and success there was very specific. It was having a good P&L, right? So driving sales, reducing cost. So the things I was doing I was not doing and putting those things at risk. I was doing those things and I was having successful results. And that's why they kept me around, despite the fact that I wasn't sort of falling in line in the other ways.
So I guess what I'm hearing is having the same end vision, wanting to get to the same place as everybody on the team, but you're just choosing different paths to get there, to maybe unlock a new creative approach or a new efficient approach or like whatever. Is that kind of okay? Cool. Awesome.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think it's important to say, if I go into a job, I need to know what success looks like. I need to know what the goals are for the company. It's not creative and interesting for me to decide that the goals are different for me than they are for the company. That's just a disaster, right? Like if success looks like growing sales, if success looks like growing market share, if success grows, it looks like innovation. I can't decide that success are other things. I can decide how I'm going to get there. And the more creative I am, or the more interesting my path is to get there, the more I'll make a name for myself. But I don't get to decide what the goals are.
Yeah. So you make this transition to Apple. What was where was Apple at this time? Paint that picture of why they were recruiting you and what your role was going to be.
Yeah, sure. So this was the late 90s, and the iMac had just come out. So the iMac was sort of the bulbous, colorful computer that was up on billboards everywhere. It looked like a rainbow. There were no Apple retail stores. There was no iPod. There was no iPhone. So when I joined, they were trying to put a team together to help create the Apple retail stores. And so they were looking for people from different retail backgrounds to help sort of build this idea.
Okay. And what was their approach different? Were there any key lessons you learned from the Apple approach that you can share with us that you leverage to this day that are beneficial?
Yeah. I mean, so I was a part of a team of 7 people, and we got to build everything from, we worked on the real estate strategy, the store design, the consumer experience all around, the customer flow, inventory management, technology, systems, process, employee policies. I mean, it was like we all got to do everything. So for me, in terms of my personal learnings and the opportunity I had, huge, right? I mean, it's very rare that somebody gets to experience so many aspects of a business. Usually you go in and you're like, I'm a training person, so I do training, or I'm an architect, so I design the building. I mean, the team that I worked with got to work on every single aspect of it. So that was huge. And then of course, having access to Steve Jobs and just, watching him and hearing the way he thought about things was incredibly powerful.
Steve Jobs is an interesting leader because a lot of people that knew him, a lot of people have no issues with saying he was kind of an asshole.
He always a dick. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, for sure.
He was an incredible leader. So, I mean, I'm not encouraging people to take the Steve Jobs approach to leadership of being a dick. Maybe that doesn't work well in the restaurant industry, but there are some key lessons. I mean, he did have some type of genius that was very effective. What was that genius that he had?
Yeah. I feel very strongly about this. I think being an asshole doesn't work 99.9% of the time. So if people want to take that approach, they're going to fail. I mean, the reason that it's so well known that he's an asshole is simply because it's so unusual to be that successful and have a personality like that. So if people decide that that's the portion of the story that they want to take, it's not gonna work out well. The reason that he was a successful leader despite that is because he was a crazy genius and because he was a crazy visionary.
Yeah. And I don't think Wozniak gets enough credit in that story. I think that who would Steve Jobs have been if not for Wozniak? You know what I'm saying? Like, he was the technician and
Yep.
Steve Jobs was the marketer, and they had a really tight relationship. And I don't think Apple, obviously Apple wouldn't be where it is today or wouldn't even exist if those two didn't come together. And their unique combination of marketer, visionary, and technician. And so, I mean, where would Steve Jobs be without that technician in his corner? You know what I'm saying? So I think the power
Yes.
of partnerships is that's just a testament. You can't be the biggest dick in the world and have that technician, that skill set in your pocket and be so valuable because of that skill set that, it kind of puts you on a fast track.
Yeah. I mean, learning how to utilize people and their talents and understanding the bigger vision of the world is incredibly important. I think Steve knew how to do that.
So you were with Apple for 6 years, right? You had 2 roles there, going into retail, opening stores, but you also, why'd you get away from that? Let me ask you that. What was going on around this time where you made the transition in your title?
Oh gosh. So when I was working for Apple and I was working on the new store opening team, and I personally had the opportunity to open several of the locations, I also was accepted into a program at Apple, and I don't know if they still do it, but they offered a full scholarship for a master's program. So Apple paid for me to go back and get my master's degree in organizational development. And when I graduated from the program, part of what's involved in macro social development is, reevaluating things like infrastructure and business programs. And so I was working with the chief people officer at the time. Actually, we were having lunch together, and he brought up that there was some opportunity in some other departments and wanted to know if I'd be interested in helping them sort of restructure some of these things. And that took me down this path that ended up eventually landing me in the role of chief diversity officer at Apple.
Okay. I'm curious, when you went back to school and you were studying basically how to reorganize a company, what were the key elements? Like from a 30,000 foot thing, like what were the key takeaways from that degree, which has allowed you to go into these organizations? I think there's 3 or 4 more beyond this point where you kind of get hired in. The organization is already established and you're there to reorganize. You're there to get this brand, this culture, and help them scale it. So what were the key things that you learned to be able to do that you pull from this degree?
Yeah. I mean, the thing that's interesting about this subject is that there's sort of the macro level, what's the purpose of the organization, to the micro level, which is, what is every single individual's role within the organization. I think having perspective on the full sort of life cycle or filter of that, understanding that the company's ultimate purpose cannot be achieved without aligning the mission to what every single person is doing at the most basic level in the organization. I think most people don't get that those things actually are connected. So I think the biggest learning would be just my visceral understanding of sort of the cogs in the wheel that actually make it successful.
Okay. So why leave Apple? I mean, an incredible organization, tons of opportunity. You got on early, so I feel like the sky is the limit, right? Relatively early, not super.
Yep. The reason I left was in this role, this chief diversity officer role. It was an interesting role in that I had the opportunity to work with a lot of different departments. I spent a lot of time sort of talking to people about why diversity mattered through the organization. So I'll back up just to say, it was in a conversation at lunch where I was talking to our chief people officer about the fact that most of the departments were struggling with staffing issues. They were struggling specifically with hiring electrical engineers. At the time, electrical engineers were all the rage, and there were just not enough of them. And so in this conversation with him at lunch, I made a comment which was, gosh, it seems like, most people who are graduating, and I don't even know why I said this, most people who are graduating from electrical engineering program are white men. And there's less and less white men in the country. And so, unless other people start, going into these programs, we're going to have a big issue from a technology standpoint. I mean, that was all I said. And then he was like, I've been thinking we should create a diversity department here at Apple. Do you want to, be the chief diversity officer for Apple? And I was like, whoa. I mean, I'm not an HR person. And he was like, no, this is exactly the kind of thinking we need. And so I ended up sort of creating this job and creating this department that is there today. And it's very, successful department, but it was not my desire to ever sort of go create this thing. It was just something that I had the opportunity to do. So, I did that for a couple of years. I worked with historically Black colleges. I worked with a lot of work groups like Women in Technology. I did a lot of presentations. I met with deans of college to talk about, ways to, get people more interested in these programs. And it was cool, but it wasn't my passion. I mean, it was like something I like doing, but the truth is I really like building and growing retail restaurant, hospitality businesses. That's the excitement I get from sort of the chaos of all that is that. What really was more of a personal driver. So when I realized that, I didn't like sitting at my computer, creating presentations, doing, road shows. That wasn't my thing. I liked being where the action was. That's when I sort of realized I probably need to find my way back into the retail world.
What is it exactly? You said the chaos of it, right? What is it exactly that you love about scaling business and doing all that you do? Like, break that down.
Well, I mean, for many years, when I worked at Macy's, I ran their home department, including their Christmas store. So, I mean, I was working 7 days a week, round the clock. I mean, I worked Christmas Eve till late at night. I would fly home for Christmas. I would come back at 5 a.m. to, work on the day after. Like, it was sort of built into my hard wiring that this sort of movement and crazy chaos was how I operated. So when I went to an environment where I suddenly working Monday through Friday, sitting at a computer, that was very uncomfortable for me. What I realized is that I like that in retail, things kind of never stop. I mean, it's like, even if you're only working in the US, you still have, from time zone standpoint, business is opening at 8, 9, 10 a.m., closing at 8, 9, 10 p.m. I mean, it's kind of always going. And I just like the excitement of something that's always moving and shifting. And again, coming back to that idea of what motivates people, what drives people, it's just something I'm so curious about. Even for me, it comes down to what kinds of pots and pans are people most interested in and why? Are people more interested in the price? Are they more interested in the material? Are they more interested in the brand? I mean, that kind of stuff, that's where I really geek out.
Like why people work. And I'm right there with you. Why we are the way we are. How did we get here, right?
Yes.
It's fascinating stuff. And there's just so much of that that's just related to the hospitality industry. I think it's a lot because I think chaos is underrated. And I'm right there within. I think I thrive in chaos. Like I'm
Same.
at my when I'm just when I don't know what the next hour brings, where I'm just going. Yes. But at the same time, we can't exist like that and scale a business, right? And there's got to be that, and there's tons of emphasis on the significance of systems, processes, procedures, protocols, all these things. Like you need that to be successful. But yes. I think we got so close to that in the 90s and earlier 2000s that we lost sight of chaos. And we forgot how important chaos was, because that's human. That's where the story is.
Yes.
So did you recognize this? Is this something that you picked up on too?
Yeah. So, I mean, thriving in chaos can mean two things, right? Thriving in chaos can mean that you're just a chaotic person, and so it's feeding you. Thriving in chaos for me is about creating order in chaos. Maybe again, something that's sort of a nod to my past, but the reason I thrive in chaos is because I love process and systems and orders. So for me, it's about going into chaotic environments and creating order in a way that doesn't lose all the magic that was there with chaos. And I think that's probably the most important thing. And I mean, when I went to work for Peet's, for example, Peet's had been around for 40 years by the time I got there. But it was still operating very much like a tribal company. I think there was 150, 200 locations. I don't even remember how many Peet's Coffees there were, but there were virtually no systems and process in place because the whole Peet's was created in Berkeley, and it was created around the product and the quality of the product. And there was this thinking that if you created too many systems and process, you would lose something about the product itself. I think the only reason they hired me and allowed me to do some of the things I did is because I worked for Apple, and they thought, well, she can't be too corporate-y and too structured if she worked for Apple. So maybe there's something in there. And I think there actually was, because for me, stripping out the things that make a business interesting, stripping out the culture, stripping out the story, that's a disaster. You can't create process and allow any of those things to be damaged. So I think my personal superpower has been what makes the brand special and unique, and how do I create order and structure in a way that actually maximizes those things versus, reducing the power.
So I feel like the next natural question is how, I know it's not, you can't answer this in one answer, but how do you cement those things that are the soul of a brand, the things that we can't lose at the expense of scaling, because if we lose it, then like it's all the steam's taken out of our sales, like all the wind's taken out of our sales. How do you do what you just said? How do you keep those important cultural things, the chaos, or even use them to excel the system processes? How do you do that?
Yeah, I can't tell you that. No. Okay, so I mean, so I think, first of all, I should say that I've been very fortunate to have opportunities where I go work for successful companies. I mean, it's not like I'm taking some broken company that had a terrible product and a shitty brand, and I was able to revive it from the dead. I don't think most people could do that. I certainly cannot do that. So I'm very selective in where I go in the first place, right? So for me, the places that I thrive in are places where it's like really quality product and a really strong brand with sort of a cult following. So the kinds of places that I work like that, if I'm going there because I know, I drank Peet's coffee for many, many years before I went to Peet's Coffee, had a very strong culture, had a really avid following. For me, it was like, what are the things about Peet's that made me feel that way? What are the things about Peet's that have kept them in business and so successful for this long? It's like, it's about product quality. It's about the history. It's about the culture. It's about the narrative. But the things that are making it less successful are the fact that maybe it's not as profitable as it needs to be. Maybe the focus on quality has sometimes made the receiving of the product slow enough that people don't feel comfortable stopping by to get a coffee on the way to work because they're not afraid they'll get out of there in time. Like, what are the pieces that you can adjust so that the financial aspects of the business can actually be better without hurting those other things? And to me, it's just an exercise of going through. If I do this, will it affect this? No. If I do this, will it affect this? Yes. Then don't do that. Okay. Is there another way to get to that result without affecting this thing? Yeah, we can also, it's like a puzzle.
Is it like the what if, and like what's your process for dissecting these processes? Is there are you just kind of like doing like a step-by-step, like, are you literally just breaking down the processes and seeing if there's a more efficient, effective, profitable way to do something without losing a piece of your soul?
Yeah. I mean, I'll give you an example. So this is a very sort of retail restaurant reference that people would get if they're in the business. But, when you're operating a restaurant or you're operating a store, you're taking in a lot of money. And, barring the current state of the cashless movement where people are not taking cash, which we can go into if you wanted. But basically, and most of my career, people were taking in money, right? Taking in massive amounts of cash and they're putting it in the register. And every restaurant, every retailer has, some form of, at the end of the night, counting out the register. So what happens from there is what sort of operators would call cash handling procedures, right? Like, you count out the money, you put this amount in the safe, you put this much in a drop, and this much goes to the bank. So those are cash handling procedures. Most businesses that have a handful of locations create some sort of cash handling procedures. Peet's had been around for 40 years, more than 100 locations. They didn't have standardized cash handling procedures. And the reason was somebody believed that if we create cash handling procedures, the employees will think we're accusing them of stealing. And that would negatively impact the culture. So again, that's the right thinking. You don't want to do things that are going to make employees feel shitty about the culture. But it's like, is that really where you want to lay on your sword? Because the fact is, thousands and thousands of dollars weren't making it to the bank and employees were stealing. Yeah. Not all employees were stealing, but it was like, that's not the thing you want to hang your hat on. Like, create procedures and systems so that you can find it and track it when it goes missing. Yeah. And so you can weed out the people who are actually hurting your culture. But it's like those kinds of things.
Yeah. So, I mean, like an example of just listening to that issue, like one thing you could do that would empower the culture is to practice like open book management and make it about educating the people how to run a business. So if they want to go open their own place someday, they know exactly how to about empowerment and making it about the empowerment. Like, we're doing this to you about business, just so you can know how cash is managed. Like when you take, it's all about how you approach it, I think is really,
That's right. So much is about approach, and it's about, again, understanding people. I mean, there's some belief out there that people don't like rules. But I think that's not necessarily true. People don't like arbitrary rules.
People don't like change. People don't like change, and rules usually enforce change, or you need change to implement rules, right? And yes. I think part of it's scary, and it's the initial resistance that we focus on. But when we know what our job does, or when we know what our job done right looks like, and we have an aiming point, it's actually very empowering. It actually gives people more a sense of security and control. And it's actually
yes. Again, helping people understand the reason for things can make a big difference.
Yeah. So I can't believe how fast time is going with you, which means this is a really great conversation. We're already at 51 minutes. We haven't even gotten to tender greens yet. So anything you want to summarize, any other key experiences at Peet? I kind of just let you freestyle right now. Like, what do you want to talk about? What do you think is near and dear to your heart that has made you successful? And drop that on us, and we'll kind of talk a little bit about tender greens. And I wanted to get some advice on COVID, obviously, too. That was the reason why I just reached out in the first.
Right. Gosh. Oh, yeah, that. I think it's, really important in the earlier stages of your career to understand what your strengths are. And I've said this before, but, a lot of people spend a lot of time and energy focusing on their weaknesses. And, focusing on your weaknesses might get you from being like bad at something to better. But it's not going to make you great. So focusing on your strengths, knowing what you do differently than other people, and capitalizing on those is probably, if I had to put a through line to many of these jobs, it would be my own ability to hone in on the things that made me good at what I do.
Got you. And exactly what it is that you're good at doing is seeing the big picture, seeing efficiencies, and finding order in chaos in a way that doesn't suck the soul out of chaos. I love it. So Peet's is a great organization. Again, I feel like you go to these organizations, you help them, and then maybe like you're always looking for the next project, and you're always like, take us through that thought process of always trying to look through the next process, and how you've kind of found yourself always on these, you're never going down either. You're always shooting up, One organization is better than the other, but I feel like when you came on Tender Greens, very forward-thinking organization, very relevant organization. Take us through that.
Yeah. I mean, part of what you're referencing is that I have an innate desire to grow, to learn. And part of that is about finding an organization in a place where I know I can add value and doing the things that I'm good at to help get that organization to the next level. But it's also personal, right? Like I have my own ambitions. And so I want to grow an organization. I want to take an organization from point A to wherever. But if I'm doing that, my goal is to leave it better than I found it, but also to continue learning along the way. So I have worked for great organizations, and you said, you worked for Apple, that was great. Why did you leave? Peet was a great organization. So at some point in every job, I've found that I've been able to add value and get it to a certain place. But then I'm kind of like, all right, I'm ready for my next thing. So if the organization can't offer it up, then I'll find the next organization where I can, again, grow the organization, but where I can personally learn more. Because I'm not the kind of person who just wants to do the same thing over and over and over again. I get bored quickly. So part of it's been about the organization, and part of it's been about personal opportunity and a new role.
So what was it about Tender Greens that gave you an opportunity to learn more? What was so different about Tender Greens that gave you this whole new landscape of new lessons to learn?
So much. Okay. So part of my desire was that I love Tender Greens. I was personally a customer of Tender Greens, eating at Tender Greens 2 to 3 times a week for a couple of years. So I loved the product. the founders who were still running the business were at a place where they were looking for somebody who had scaled businesses. The board, the investors, they wanted to grow the company. And so they wanted somebody who had experience growing brands. They really wanted somebody who didn't suck the life out of brands to grow them. So I think that's what made me appealing. And they wanted someone to take over. So basically, when I was interviewing for the job, I was interviewing for the job of president. There were two founders left. One of them was president, one of them was CEO. I was interviewing for the job of president, but the other CEO also had plans to leave and move on to do other things. So the idea was I would be president, I would learn the ropes about the restaurant world, and then I would take over the CEO role. So for me, part of it was just simply the idea that I could go in and be president, CEO of a company, something I'd been wanting to do for a long time, something that I felt like I'd been building up my skill set for many years to do, and was kind of like, yeah, I want to run the show. I'm going to be the person who actually like makes the calls here without a boss. Everybody has a boss. I have a board, but like on the day to day, I get to make all the decisions. So that was a big part of it for me. I also was incredibly interested in learning more about the restaurant industry itself. I mean, there's no business more operationally challenging than the restaurant industry. I sort of saw myself as a sort of operational expert. Traditional retail's hard. Service, I was, in the hair business, very hard. But the restaurant business is hard, capital H hard.
Yeah. So what makes the restaurant industry so much more difficult in your opinion?
There's so many things out of one's control. I mean, basically, from the supply chain, getting food from the farm all the way to getting it into someone's mouth. There's a lot of things that can go wrong along the way. And that doesn't even include, the things that are required to make the food great. Just like there's a lot of things that can break and go wrong. But the next level of what's required to make sure it's amazing requires a lot of people, a lot of process systems, a lot of passion. I mean, there's really no industry that I know of that requires better operations and more passion to be successful.
So when you came on Tender Greens, it was 2017, right? 2 years ago?
Yes.
2017. What was your biggest challenge from like day one with this new landscape of food and beverage?
Well, I mean, as someone who has worked in a lot of different industries and as someone who had a ton of experience in things like operation and marketing, the piece that was most challenging for me was just learning about food. I mean, I've, like everyone, love food, and I was a customer, and I think have pretty high standards around the quality of food I'm willing to eat. But learning just the basics of how to make food, understanding why the freshness is important, what it means for food to be fresh, understanding the supply chain and getting something from a farm into the hands of an executive chef when it's in whole form and then it needs to be literally processed to be delivered to a consumer into a new product when it's still like in the confines of your restaurant. I mean, there's a lot to learn around food. Yeah. So I think I spent my first 6 months just learning as much as I could about the food, where it came from, what makes it, good. And so that was probably the biggest learning curve for me. It wasn't a challenge in a negative way, but it was definitely a challenge in terms of like, I have a lot to learn.
Yeah. So once you felt like you had a grasp on the food, the life cycle of the food, getting it to, the farm to the customer's mouth and the lingos and all that stuff, what was your next challenge?
My next challenge was the restaurant landscape itself. When I joined, it was the most competitive time in history in the restaurant world. And that led to, issues around how do you keep customers loyal in such a saturated environment. The guys who built the brand had created an amazing brand and fantastic product. They didn't invest a ton in technology and marketing because they came up in a time when that wasn't as important as the food itself. So when I joined during this incredibly saturated competitive time, I just spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to get the customer to understand what made Tender Greens unique and why they should come to Tender Greens versus, you know, the hundreds of other places that were not only on the block next to us, but like on their phone.
Well, that's part of the process. It sounds like to again, what we're answering is how do you keep customers loyal, right? That's what you had. That was a problem you had to address an oversaturated, very competitive market where everybody's now making salads and grain bowls. It's like the new thing.
That's right.
And it sounds like your solution was to leverage technology. How were you leveraging technology to keep a human element strong? Loyalty.
Yeah. So, I mean, going back to what we were talking about before in terms of like when you're looking at efficiencies and systems, how do you not break the things that are amazing while you're trying to improve things, right? So the product quality at Tender Greens was amazing. It was something that they never compromised on. And even when competition got hard and profits started going down because labor rates went up, they could have made the choice to, you know, change the quality of the products. They could have made the choice to change the size of portions. They didn't. And so when I came in, I was like, I can't do those things either, because the thing that makes Tender Greens unique is the food, the quality. So we're not going to touch those things. But what we do need to do is find a way to invest in technology so that the people who love Tender Greens can get value out of it. So we created a loyalty program that set up a tier system so that the most loyal people received, you know, incentives for coming more frequently, but also, you know, in the marketing associated with making people aware of who we were and that we had a loyalty program. I mean, that's sort of where we invested a lot of money.
Okay. Are you still using that loyalty program today?
Yes.
What is that program? Can you share? Was it in-house or did you outsource?
We outsourced it to Punch.
Okay.
And it's, you know, on tendergreens.com now. We have an app for it, but I can tell you, and I know in a second we're going to be talking about what's going on right now in the world, but our loyalty program has really saved our lives. If we didn't double down on the loyalty program in this economy, we would be in big trouble.
This is a big challenge for a lot of people, is leveraging technology to increase that human element of loyalty. There's a lot of options out there too. It's almost overwhelming. Like what made you guys land or settle on Punch? What was it about Punch that appealed to you and what you guys were trying to accomplish?
So what I'll tell you is the team before I got there landed on Punch. They were in the early stages of creating a loyalty program. And this is actually, you know, in line with what you're asking in terms of the loyalty program themselves. So they asked some basic questions. They came up with the idea of launching Punch. Punch seemed to have the basic tools that were necessary to build a loyalty platform, but they didn't think through the program itself as much as probably they needed to, because when you're creating a loyalty program, if you don't do it well, you can sort of create disincentives, right? So you don't want to have a loyalty program that only rewards people who come so frequently that you're never going to get people past a certain tier. So there was a program in place. It wasn't really launched. It wasn't really developed. When my team came in, they actually sort of redesigned the loyalty program to make it more aligned with, again, you know, human incentives.
It sounds like you need to make, if you're approaching, if you're taking the tiered approach, you need to make the tiers attainable.
Yes.
Because if the first hurdle is so high to get over, then they don't get into the funnel. They don't.
Yeah, you need to make the tiers attainable, and you need to make the rewards interesting. I mean, if it's like you hit this tier, now you get something that is not relevant, then the person loses interest.
What's an example of an attainable tier, like the first tier? Like what's a realistic first tier to get people to get over that hump?
Well, I mean, it would be so different for every business, but one thing that I would suggest is, you know, look at how your consumer currently behaves, right? So if you're saying something like 30% of our customers are doing this or buying this or coming this often, then that's probably a good place to set your first tier. right? So it's like you want those people who are 30% of your customers to be doing whatever they're doing more often. And then you push the tiers up so that you can get those people who are already doing that to get to the next tier.
Okay. So you kind of take something that people are already doing, and you just give a little, what's one little extra?
Thank you. Like a little bit of a, here's a logo item or a free gift or, kids eat free, like whatever it might be, something that's just a little bit of a reward, which starts out as sort of like a thank you for being so loyal.
You mentioned some incentives that you share. Like, what are some of your favorite incentives you think to add value? How can you add value in these different tiers without necessarily breaking the bank? Like can you create perceived value?
Yeah. I mean, again, it really depends on the customer and the business, but it might be something like, if you're noticing that 30% of your customers are getting a certain drink or getting a cookie, like maybe your first incentive is that once a week you throw one of those things in because it's something they love already, and that it would be great for them to be like, oh, well, my cookies on the house today. So again, something they already like, that they're already going to do. If it's something that's totally outside their regular behavior, they're just going to be annoyed by it.
Got you. So you're a psychology major. I'm really kind of curious. Do you know why these loyalty programs are so effective? What's going on with how we work and why we do the things we do that make these programs so effective?
Well, they're only effective if they're built correctly. And the ones that are built correctly make people feel good about the decisions they're making. I mean, I think if I feel like this program is rewarding me for being in the know or being smart or for being, a regular customer, then that makes me feel like I'm spending my time wisely. And I think people like to feel good about the decisions they make.
Got you. So you already mentioned that this loyalty program has saved your butt with this, pandemic that's here. And you can't, I feel like at this point, if you didn't already have a pretty well-established loyalty program, you kind of missed. Is that a false statement? Do you think it's
I would make a distinction. There's loyal customers, and then there's loyalty program, right? So we have lots of customers who come to Tender Greens all the time, and they either, before all of this, they came in person. After this, they might be purchasing our product through Postmates, DoorDash. They may come and take their product and leave. That doesn't necessarily mean they're invested in our loyalty program itself. Which basically is an opt-in system where you have, your name in there and your meals are being sort of recorded. I would say if you don't have a loyal customer going into this, you would be in trouble. Yeah. I think if you have the added benefit of a database of customers that you come to you frequently and you know what they like, then that gives you a whole nother level that you can access during a time like this.
Interesting, because we call it loyalty programs. We also call it reward programs. And I think that the reward programs is probably a better use of words. Because like you said, they're already loyal. You're just rewarding them for their loyalty.
That's right. And there's lots of loyal people who aren't part of the program.
Yeah. So, I mean, we have some time left. I still want to I would love to bust out a speed round with you, a 5-minute speed round before we wrap. I want to get into COVID a little bit. Obviously, I don't want to spend much time talking about what you have done because I feel like a lot of that ship has sailed. But I want to spend time talking about what you're going to do and what you think the future of the industry looks like and how we can come back stronger. That's really the theme I want to echo when we're talking about COVID is like, how can we share knowledge and come back stronger? How can we choose to come back stronger? So real quick, how did COVID-19 affect you guys? Were you able to retain a lot of your employees? Did you have to lay off a bunch of people? Did you have to shut down or close temporarily? Like, what was the result?
Yes, all of those things. So at Tender Greens, we had a fairly healthy delivery and to-go business going into this. So unlike fine dining, we were already a little better positioned. So when we closed down our dining rooms, we were able to pivot to that form of business. It's, it's just a percentage of what we were doing before, but we did close down a handful of stores on the East Coast, a couple of locations in malls where the malls were basically closed. The rest of the locations we left open, but between the stores we closed and the skeleton crews we went down to, we laid off about half our employees.
I mean, that's pretty good compared to what other people had to do. I mean, the fact that you're able to hang on to half is something, you know?
Yeah.
So what's your plan for the future? I think that's really what people want to know. How are you adapting your businesses? What's your plan for the future?
Yep. So at Tender Greens, we pretty quickly launched into a line of grocery goods. And the way we went about it was, as consumers, there was lots of product we didn't have access to, right? We'd go to a grocery store and we couldn't get, eggs, milk, butter, meat products, fresh produce. And we knew that as consumers that we were frustrated by not being able to get to that foods. We also knew, because we're a restaurant that brings in whole fresh foods every single day, that there are farmers and food suppliers that suddenly had their supply chain completely cut off. Because with all the restaurants closing down, they've got like crops that they've grown. They've got like milk. They've got stuff that's just sitting there.
You know, like it's like we're getting into that, that freshness, that season of freshness, right? Well, maybe
that's right.
Around, but in other parts of the country. So
basically, we wanted to find a way to get that food to consumers, which is why we created this grocery box, because it was like people are pouring out milk. People are, crops are going bad. So we created this product to try and meet that need. So what that means for the future for us, I think in creating that straight from the farm through our restaurants, putting these boxes together and getting that up to the consumer, we're learning a lot about what matters to people. And so we're looking at our menu, and when we reopen, we're looking at like, how does this evolve our menu long term? Are there products that we're selling today in this, COVID time that we weren't selling before that may stay on our menu permanently? And that's what we're looking at right now.
I think what's gonna I don't know if these if the whole grocery approach is gonna have legs for a long term. I think that people are gonna start slowly getting more confident going out. But I do think people are going to try to reduce how much they go out. They can go pick up, their lunch today, but they can also get leftovers and reduce, the amount of times they have to go. I think, what I'm saying? Like, how can we create something that lets our consumers have leftovers so they can reduce the amount of times they have to go out?
That's right. That's right.
I think that, what are you guys doing? Do you agree with that?
Totally agree with it. So we have groceries, like proper groceries, like literally like a dozen eggs or, a pound of butter. But we also have things like, a full cooked steak, a full cooked chicken that serves 4. We have large venue salads. So you could create a whole family meal so you could literally buy what you would normally buy. Maybe you would buy a soup, or you'd buy like a regular salad. Or you could buy from us a steak for 4. You could buy, a side of, quart of mashed potatoes, and you could buy, a Caesar salad from us. And where 2 months ago we didn't have that, you would buy an individual entree. Today we offer that, and you would now have food for your family for days.
Yeah, and
so that may stay, that may last.
Yeah, and I think that, the truth is, I mean, we're like, I think the split now is like 40% of all money spent on food is at restaurants now versus 60% of people. I can't remember the exact number, but we're almost at that 50-50 point. So there's a huge segment of people that have become accustomed to eating well and eating healthy. And now they're saying, nope, you can't go to restaurants. You got to go to grocery stores, but they suck at cooking. Or they don't know how to cook. They didn't have any stuff they still want to be able to get somebody to cook for them. Right. But in a way that is just much more effective, that they can stretch out over multiple meals. The convenience of that. I think that's where you're going to see a lot. I think it's a good thing. I really do, because I think that you're going to, this isn't my time to say what I think. What do you think is going to happen? Like, that's
well, I do think people are experimenting more, right? People are, you can't find bread yeast anywhere, right? Like suddenly everyone in America is making bread. So people are experimenting more. I think people are going to find things they're good at. But it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be making all of their meals, right? They might be making certain things. They might be ordering parts of their meal. They might be, ordering, like I said, maybe they order a steak from us, but then they supplement it with the things they're good at making.
So I think it's just a matter of consumer behavior. Like,
That's right.
paying attention to the new consumer behavior and filling those new voids that have been created within the market.
That's right. That's right.
So what else are you going to do to stay creative to serve your market, or things that you have already done that you can share with us?
Yeah. So we launched these grocery boxes, then we actually created an a la carte format so that somebody could buy their traditional entree, but then they could also get, a thing of a bag of onions or a bunch of bananas with their, steak meal. We also, on Wednesday, are going to be launching, now that the laws have made it easier for us, bottled wine and 6-pack and 12-packs of beer. So that's another way in which you can get, again, maybe you're going to buy a steak dinner from us. Now you can get a bottle of wine too, which is also going to be a new behavior. And this has not been announced yet, but probably in about 2 weeks, we're going to be launching meal kits.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah.
I won't pull back too many layers on that. One thing I do want to know before we go to the speed round is, what do you think the future of the industry looks like? As far as, when do you think we're going to come out of this, your prediction? And also, when do you think we're going to come out of this? Answer that. And then also, I would love to know what you think needs to change. Now that we have this opportunity to reset, how do you want to come back stronger?
Yeah. So, God, I mean, this is a, multiple times a day conversation with so many restaurateurs. I think, taking your questions a little bit out of order, the thing that needs to change, I think the thing that we now know that it will be very hard for us to forget is germs, right? Like, I mean, the thing that's so bizarre about this COVID-19 and the fact that people can get sick is that I personally have been isolating with my family for over a month, and I haven't gotten sick at all. So, I mean, I have 2 kids in grammar school. We're sick all the time in this house, right? Somebody is always sick. Nobody's been sick. So that's sort of the mind-boggling thing for me, is that, like, great, we're avoiding getting this terrible virus, but we're not getting anything else, which means germs are real.
Yeah, right?
Yeah. So I think the thinking about germs and passing along germs and the hand washing and the clean, like I think our brains are going to be forever changed around our awareness of germs and other people. How that plays out is a mystery to me. Especially when you think about things like bars where people are just like all over each other. I mean, so I think what that translates to in terms of going back and reopening, I think I think most responsible businesses will open slowly and cautiously. I think we're going to see a lot of places, and we already do see it in certain places in the South, where they're just going to open up. And I think they're going to see a resurgence. And then I think they're going to back up again, and they're going to end up doing that back and forth. Like, to me, that's a disaster. I would much rather open more slowly and cautiously and move into a more normalized economy than risk sort of like jumping the gun and end up having some sort of a relapse that I think would be terrible.
Slowly reducing the restrictions, and you're already starting to see it with like grocery stores, right? And where it was really controlled, and now they're starting to get a little bit more lax with, like, but in that time they were able to implement procedures within the store.
Well, yes.
To combat the likelihood of contracting something within the store. So, we've adapted, in different ways. So we don't necessarily. So I think that's what you're going to see is like you said, just like that slow. It's going to be a pendulum swinging back.
Yes.
What do you think needs to change about the industry? That's one thing I'm really curious. If we can come back stronger, what's one thing that if we all get on the same page today about this is what's wrong with our industry, and this is what we need to do collectively to make it better, and we can make that change now, what's that look like?
Well, I mean, going into this crisis, the restaurant industry, let's be honest, was already in a bit of a crisis. It was a crisis of saturation, too much competition. I would say probably too much mediocre product. Probably restaurants that maybe shouldn't have existed in the first place because they weren't offering something unique and special. And I think some of what happens when we get out of this, hoping that the majority of restaurants survive, I'm hoping that the ones that survive because They really are offering something unique and special. They're offering a great product. They're offering great service. They're doing interesting, different things that maybe weren't done before. So I think we all have to look at sort of why we were existing in the first place and what we need to do to justify that existence. So I think what comes out of this is that people sort of double down on what they're good at. And the businesses that maybe shouldn't have been around and maybe weren't, staying current with the times or didn't have something special, maybe those businesses retire and allow some of these sort of better quality restaurants to thrive.
Yeah. It's funny you say that, because I've said that with, it's hard to say this without getting people to hate you, because so many people are going through so much shit right now. And it's just like, you got to be sympathetic and empathetic for what people are going through. But at the same time, like you said, it was an oversaturated market that was being, like money is just being pumped into this industry.
That's right.
Especially because retail is going away. Like it's only natural that you're transitioning to the restaurant world, because retail is going away,
Yep, that's right.
And because of that, like you said, or like these retailers or these property owners are just pumping money into the restaurant industry. Yep. It's not realistic. So I think it's a good thing that like the cream of the crop's rising to the top. It's going to make us only stronger and better. And it's sad that some people are losing their careers, but maybe you weren't meant to be here in the first place. If you didn't, and it sounds cold, but there's a certain, because of where we were, it's kind of a good thing that the market's being.
There is going to be a bit of a survival of the fittest for sure.
Yeah. It's just the reality of it. But I've loved this conversation. Thank you so much. We're back. And the first question I have for you, Danyelle, is what is your it factor, a habit, a trait, a characteristic you believe most contributes to your success?
Confidence.
What is your biggest weakness?
Ice cream.
Ooh. What's one question you ask or thing you look for during the interview process? When you're building your team, when you're looking for new people, what qualities are you looking for? What questions are you asking?
The question that I ask that is a deal breaker is, what is your go-to karaoke song?
Ooh, and what are you looking for?
I'm looking for a comfort and a vulnerability to answering the question itself.
Okay, I love it.
The song itself is.
What is your biggest challenge today, your current challenge?
COVID-19.
Yeah, right. And I think we already kind of broke down how you're dealing with this, so you don't have to answer that again. Share one code of conduct or behavior you teach your team. This is a core value, a way to be, a way to act.
To speak up.
I love it. Why is that so important to you?
Oh my gosh, because if you have a great team, which you should have a great team because it's incredibly important, but then they're going to be full of information and knowledge that I don't have. If they're not speaking up, then I'm limited to what's in my brain, and then I don't need them.
Awesome. And I think it's really important that you get to encourage your people to speak up, because we live in a culture today where it's not encouraged. If you're an employee, like, you do your job, and we don't really encourage people to speak up.
That's
and
a waste. It's a waste.
Yeah. You give yourself access to that potential energy. Share one uncommon standard of service you teach your team. So this is something that is common within the four walls of Tender Greens, but not common throughout the industry as far as going above and beyond to serve your guest.
Not speaking via script, real conversations, connecting with people.
What's one book that's a must read to make us a better person or restaurant owner?
It's obvious, but Setting the Table by Danny Meyer.
What's your biggest lesson from that book?
My biggest lesson from that book is that there are no rules. Basically, he says a lot in the book. Who said we couldn't? And it's something that I love thinking about all the time.
I love it. And I'm curious, did you read that book before you got into the food and beverage industry, or is that?
I read the book before my interview with Danny Myers. But I wished I had read it many years before.
I forgot that Danny Meyer is an investor at Tender Green.
Yeah. He's an investor and a friend.
That's awesome. I love Danny. I don't know him personally, but I love what he stands for sure. And just even like what he did over the past week with giving $10 million back. Like he got a lot of shit. And this isn't like traditional speed round stuff, but I have to defend him a little bit because he got a lot of flack for being on top of shit. And when you really think about what he got flack for, as far as getting the money that he got,
You mean
right?
Shake Shack? You mean at Shake Shack?
Yeah. But the brand, the man behind the brand. Right?
Yeah.
I think they were just on top of things, and the reason why, from what I understand, when it came to the paycheck protection program, they were just looking when the government was getting these applications or these requests, they were just filing from the most expensive to the least expensive because they wanted to get through the money as fast as possible.
Yep.
It's not on him. He's just, as an operator, he's always just been on it. So he got his stuff in. He got he got exactly what he needed to request. He just did his job, right? And I feel like, at the end of the day, it's just like.
Well, I mean, nobody knew. I mean, there's basically no rules around this, right? Everybody was doing what they felt like they had to do to save their business, and I think you can't. You can't condemn somebody for trying to save a business they built.
How many people do you know who got handed $10 million would give it back? You know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah.
Yeah.
Because the truth is, they didn't have to give it back. People's memories are short. People would have gotten over it, but they made the decision to give it back because they felt like it was the right thing to do. They're finding other ways to raise the money. But yeah, I mean, people would have gotten over it. They could have kept the money.
We like to think we would know what to do if we were put in that position. But the truth is, the majority of us, the great majority of us, will never be in that position. You know what I'm saying? So we can't relate. Like, it's hard.
No.
So
there's no rule book right now. I mean, this is unheard of. This is completely like, who knows what you're supposed to be doing right now.
I just wanted to get into that a little bit. I completely forgot that were related. So the next question I have for you is, what's one thing you feel restaurateurs don't do often enough or well enough?
Eat at other people's restaurants.
Yes. Name one service you've hired or outsourced. So this is a service and this is kind of weird with bigger operations, but like what I'm trying to do is connect good people with good people. So a marketer, a designer, skill that somebody's using and putting their skill, like in selling their skill. Who's one person or one service you've outsourced that you've been really?
So we outsource our IT side of the business, which I've never done before, to a company called Surge, run by Jason Bueller, and he's awesome.
Beautiful. And what is one technology you've adopted within the four walls of your business that's had a huge impact?
Dispatch by Olo.
Okay. And this is the last question. It's a doozy. Get ready for it. If you got the news, you'd be leaving this world tomorrow. All the memories of your work in your restaurants would be lost with your departure, with the exception of 3 pieces of wisdom that you could leave behind for the good of humanity and for your legacy. What would those 3 pieces of wisdom be?
Break the rules. Failure is necessary. You're going to die anyway.
Break the rules. Failure is necessary anyway. Wait. Break the rules. Failure is necessary, and you're going to die anyway. Awesome stuff. Thank you so much for taking the time to originally you came on my radar just to talk about COVID, and I got way more out of you. Thank you so much for being so generous with your time and knowledge. We wrap up every chat by calling somebody out. So who's one independent restaurant operator, somebody that you respect and admire and believe would make a great guest mentor like you made for us today?
Someone I love. I think she's just she's a brilliant business person, but more than that, just a fantastic person is Kimberly Malik from Salt and Straw.
Kimberly, look out. I'm coming after you on the show. And how can we connect if we want to maybe join your team or basically?
I mean, people can find me on on Instagram, I'm Denyelle Bruno.
All right. Beautiful. And thank you so much for taking the time. Again, there is no questioning. You are unstoppable.
Thanks, Eric.
You're awesome.
Take care.